of the field of addiction.
So we've heard a bit about kids getting in trouble, and if you think back to the questions that I laid out that have come over the years, about a third or half of them are about the theme of what about the children. So in drug policy, it always comes down to people worrying about what young people, what the impact is going to be. And we have here one of the expert gurus on drug education for kids. I worked with her for many years. We put on a national conference 15 years ago on drug education, the state of the art. She has, and there are copies here, the booklet that outlines her program, Safety First. And Marsha Rosenbaum is with the Drug Policy Alliance, the leading drug reform group, and many other things as well. But she's going to talk to us a little bit about the state of the art of what we know about drug education and prevention.
Can you hear me all right back there without it? No. Okay. So the issue of the kids, and when I say kids, I mean teenagers, mostly, has been deeply personal for me. I will just tell you that last month when Nancy Reagan died, I began to think back to probably her most famous message, a phrase that she delivered when a young girl in 1982 asked what she should do if someone offered her drugs. And what Nancy Reagan said is, you know what she said?
Just say no!
Go. Just say no. But this phrase, coupled with a parents' movement at the time, reacting, I have to say, to a lot of what was going on right here in the Haight, in San Francisco, to an escalation in marijuana use among teenagers in the 60s, was freaking parents out. And then we have Ronald Reagan and Nancy's Just Say No. And all of this combined with the escalating at the time war on drugs. And so you get a kind of a, how do we deal with the kids? Abstinence, 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 abstinence only. And I have to admit that in 1982, when my children, who are both in the audience here, were very, very young, I didn't mind Just Say No. I thought, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want their teenage children, their children, to abstain? But what came after that started to really scare the hell out of me. We had the DARE program, which started the very next year, and most of you know about the DARE program, which was all about Just Say No. It was all about abstinence, and it was all about scaring the bejesus out of the kids by using some, I want to just quote you some of the scare tactics that were in there. And in fact, I learned about them first from my daughter, Annie, who is, where are you, Annie? She's back there. I know she is. She's not going to raise her hand, though. She's there. She came home from school at the age of 10, and she said to me, so Mom, and remember, at this point, I have been a National Institute on Drug Abuse researcher myself for 10 years, studying heroin addiction mostly. And she comes home, very precocious child, and says, Mom, I know everything there is to know about drugs. And I thought, you know, I didn't know where to go with that remark. I said, so Annie, what do you mean? And she says, I am a graduate of DARE. I'm a DARE graduate. And I said, so like what'd you learn? What? And she says, well, Mom, she says, you may not know this, but when a person smokes marijuana, this is what happens. And you have to imagine this, okay? So she drew a picture on the chalkboard, and the picture was that she drew a big circle, And inside the circle, inside of this big circle are little circles filling up the big circle. And then she takes an eraser and she erases half of this big circle, half of the brain cells. And she says,
Oh my God.
Mom, when a person smokes marijuana, half of their brain cells get erased. And I thought, oh my God. This kind of message isn't going to stick for very long. But there were those kind of messages that came across in drug education programs that proliferated in the 1980s. DARE was the biggest, 80% of school districts. But they were everywhere, and it was all about abstinence, which, again, good idea, noble goal. I wasn't sure it was so realistic, especially since I live in San Francisco. And, you know, that said. But the programs were all about abstinence, and any kind of program that wasn't all about abstinence, that had any component that had anything to do with, for example, safety, or what we now call harm reduction, was censored. There was a wonderful book that came out about that time by Dr. Andrew Weil, and it was called From Chocolate to Morphine, Understanding Mind. And it was all of that. It was a balanced book. It wasn't advocating. It wasn't objecting. It was all of that. It was just a variety of drugs were listed in here, and good. Anyway, that book in 1983, when it came out, was banned. So any kind of open discussion, other kinds of remarks, I just have to tell you, the messages, all designed to frighten kids, were, these are quotes, drugs are categorically dangerous, all use constitutes abuse, marijuana inevitably leads to hard drug use, addiction, and lung cancer. Note the word inevitably in there. And this is one of my personal favorites. Boys who smoke marijuana will grow breasts. So those were the messages, and that you heard, and any of you young enough to have been in drug education programs at that time will remember these kinds of messages, and all of you will remember the messages that came across in the media, like the very famous fried egg commercial. Oh. This is your brain, this is drugs, fried eggs, this is what happens to your brain. But it wasn't enough then to simply try and coax, persuade teenagers to abstain. If that wasn't enough, then along come zero tolerance policies that were enforced all over and in school. So that this created actually zero tolerance, where a kid could get busted for actually bringing an aspirin to school. But it also created a scenario, we call it now the school to prison pipeline, where a whole generation of basically young black men were, and now we have mass incarceration thanks to zero tolerance policies. And so the question was, so we have zero tolerance, we have abstinence only, and did that work? Did that work? And when you look at the data, which I'm a sociologist, I love data. You look at what happened post the 1980s, and instead of reducing teenage marijuana use, it began, in fact, inching up a little bit at a time. So, you know, this is all personal for me. I wanted to see a different approach. I wanted what we call a harm reduction approach. I had teenagers here. My son, who's also in the audience, was going to Urban around the corner. Now, you think availability was an issue for him. They had an open campus, and they're on Haight Street. So you know you're kind of gonna have to deal with the reality of drugs, and that's exactly what I did. I created a program called Safety First because that was my #1 concern, and the one thing I really cared about was my kids' safety. And so I created a program, and you okay there? Perfect. And it really started off with a letter that I wrote to my son that was published in the San Francisco Chronicle. I don't have time to read it, but it's in this booklet, in this blue booklet that are in the back, I think. And this is the message. Best if you abstain. That's my message. Really, really good to abstain. Just say no, just say no, just say no. But if you do choose to, I don't like the word experiment because it sounds like a science project, but that's what people say. If you do choose to experiment, try it, whatever, this is what you need to do. You need to learn as much as you can and use science-based information. Forget the scare tactics. Forget about websites that do either one of two things. Websites that either advocate drug use or are categorically opposed. Balance, balance, balance. That's why I loved Andrew Weil's book, is because it was balanced. And finally, this was my fallback, my plan B. If I couldn't have answered, my fallback plan was know that you can call us, the parents, and the parents of their friends, anytime if you're in a compromising situation, and we'll come and get you, no questions asked. Just, it's all about safety. Now, this message I've been delivering since 1998, and what's changed, and I think it's changed here, I'm wrapping, is that there's a new approach, because there has to be a new approach. You can't continue with the same old about marijuana when it's maybe possibly going to become legal soon. You can't do it. And so the approach is just know what you're doing, be careful, safety first, and real, honest, science-based information. And that's, I think, what schools and parents are doing now. So Nancy Reagan's, just to conclude, Steve, is, so what's happening is that just say no is being replaced with this notion. It's still just say no, but the no is K-N-O-W.
Okay.